During and after the War of 1812, Native Americans, the children of the forest, east of the Mississippi River became increasingly vulnerable to American political calculations, both humanitarian and hostile. To save them from extinction, government and social advocates argued that either one, they must be civilized and absorbed, or two, starved or removed to west of the Mississippi. Yet Jeffrey Ostler opens his recent book with reference to Alexis de Tocqueville's witness to the Memphis crossing of removed Choctaws in the winter of 1831, and his observing of dogs plunging into the freezing water to keep up with their masters. According to Ostler, though, indigenous population east of the Mississippi through about 1830 were not in danger of extinction, but actually were numerically stable or gradually growing. Not all of the southeast U.S. is flat marsh and swamplands. A prominent native sheltering formation in Winston County, Alabama, is a nearly 150-foot sandstone bridge that looms 60 feet above the forest floor. It is the longest natural bridge east of the Rockies. This hill country of northern Alabama and Georgia, terrain originally harboring Creek and Cherokee bands, was unsuited for plantation-style life. Poor white farmers set down small plots and worked the land mostly by their own hands. Few slaves were introduced to the area. Perhaps their self-reliance instructed some residents of Winston County to oppose secession from the Union during the Civil War. The county's representative at the January 1861 Alabama Secession Convention, Charles Christopher Sheets, a young schoolteacher, refused to sign Alabama's Ordinance of Secession. Sheets was an outspoken opponent of the war, spent time in prison as a pro-neutrality group leader, or a Southern Unionist.
Before the war at Looney's Tavern, the story goes, Sheets and others apparently coaxed a series of resolutions stating that the people of Winston County would not take sides in the war. One resolution declared that if a state could secede from the Union, then Winston could secede from the state. Richard Payne, a pro-Confederate, laughed and shouted, "Winston County secedes! Hurrah for the free state of Winston!" His ridicule apparently triggered the legend of the Republic of Winston.
At least one other county in Arkansas and one in Mississippi tried a similar course of resistance to the overwhelming pulse of anti-Union sentiment. The state of Scott County, Tennessee, passed an official act of secession, as Tennessee became the last state to join the Confederate States of America. Four convicted conspirators in President Lincoln's assassination are hanged July 7, 1865, at what is now Fort Leslie J. McNair in Washington. Another significant rock formation in Georgia's interior, and a meeting and probably ceremonial site used by both Creek and Cherokee, is Stone Mountain, a lone mountain located a short distance east of Atlanta's city center. Ironically, it also has been a controversial landmark, but opposite in intent to the state of Winston. It is a monument to the Confederacy. The mountain was the eastern end of the Camp Belton Trail, a Native American path. The Spanish learned of the, quote, shining mountain in the 16th century. Arkansas and Oklahoma today comprise the major chunk of the newly conceived Indian Territory, presented by Jefferson, Jackson, and many colonial leaders as the promised land for compliant Indians. Meanwhile, the native elites, arguing for policies of accommodation and assimilation, feared that removal would ensure a return of their fellows to a, quote, savage state of life. Ultimately, persuasion gave way to various methods of coercion and force, both in the South and likewise in the northern states. It was the Osage tribes, already hunting and farming in the new territory, that clashed with the inflowing eastern Indians, largely Cherokee, and suffered the greatest destruction of their plains homeland. The Osage, a longtime enemy of both eastern tribes and the western plains tribes, now found themselves squeezed and pummeled by both eastern Indians and white interlopers, or squatters, sneaking onto the rich buffalo grass prairies and heart of Osage territory near the Three Forks of the Arkansas River. Smaller tribal communities, like Quapaws and Caddo, among others, found themselves dispossessed of their lands by sheer numbers of newcomers. Fort Gibson, established by the U.S. military in eastern Oklahoma in 1824, became the arbiter of peace and war for years. Nearby Fort Smith, Arkansas, also on the Arkansas River, had been established even before the federal designation of the Indian Territory. While superseded in military importance by Fort Gibson's link to the Santa Fe Trail, Fort Smith became a native transfer point and the federal court for the Western District of Arkansas. Judge Isaac C. Parker, known as the Hanging Judge, presided over the court for more than 20 years.
As early as the 1790s, the Cherokees began voluntarily moving into the Arkansas River Valley onto Osage land. This fit into President Thomas Jefferson's belief that the Louisiana Territory would be an ideal homeland for Indians living in the southeastern United States. The legacy of the Wild West nature of this region extended into the 1890s. This sketch is the only known image of the gallows. It depicts the execution of Crawford Goldsby, alias Cherokee Bill, on March 17, 1896. Although cameras were prohibited at hangings, a young man captured the scene with a Kodak, which he quickly hid in his coat. This sketch was later taken from that photograph.
Cherokee Bill threw his arm around Deputy Marshal Dick Crittenden and reached for the officer's revolver. Bill reportedly said afterward that had he obtained that gun, some of the officers, quote, would have worn away wooden overcoats.
The U.S. Court for the Western District of Arkansas held a vast jurisdiction, about 74,000 square miles, over land that was home to thousands of American Indians and increasing residents who were not tribal members. The Fort Smith Court's enormous caseload arose from a complex web of overlapping jurisdictions. While tribal courts had authority over their own members, others living in Indian territory were protected or prosecuted under U.S. law. Not even the efficiency and even-handed justice of Judge Isaac Parker could curb criminal activity in Indian territory.
In 1890, Judge Isaac Parker gained the Attorney General's consent to offer a $1,000 reward for the capture of Ned Christie. Gus York received the reward upon delivering Christie's body to the federal court in November 1892. Fort Smith, 87 men died on the gallows. While Judge Parker sat on the bench, 160 people, including 4 women, were sentenced to hang. Just over half received a reprieve from execution through pardons, commutations, reversals, or acquittals on appeal, or death in jail. The men here were hanged in Fort Smith.